everyone expected the Atlanta Falcons to possibly attack the defensive line, maybe the edge rusher position, maybe go after a corner on the outside of their defense. But in general, most people were suspecting that the Atlanta Falcons would address their defense in some way, some fashion, some form in the first round, and possibly later on in the draft. But Atlanta, instead of going with the defense, instead of going with what the mock drafts were saying and telling them, they went elsewhere. And sometimes this is a good thing, sometimes this is a bad thing. In my opinion, the Atlanta Falcons did what was right. They did the right thing here when you really pay attention to what they want to be and what they need to be a good team and to be a competitive team. Atlanta addressed 2 starting positions along their offensive line and got 2 day 1 starters with Chris Lindstrom and with Caleb McGarry at right guard and right tackle. So they have the right side of their offensive line shaped up in the first round. Now, the Atlanta Falcons are the only team since 1967 to have 5 players as first-round picks on their offensive line. Thomas Dimitroff, we know he comes from that Patriot background, even though he hasn't been there in a long time. He was with them in the early 2000s. We know that the Patriots do value protecting their quarterback. We do know that they value big guys on the defense, and it was interesting to see where he would go with this draft, but overall, they end up going with that right guard, that right tackle combination. And even though Chris Lindstrom early in the draft seemed like a reach a little bit because he wasn't a player that anyone expected to go that high, but when you couple it with Caleb McGarry later in the first round, you see where the Atlanta as an organization were heading, and you really see that this was the right way to go. So overall, I love those 2 picks because not only does it help Matt Ryan in pass protection in the Dirk Koetter scheme, who I feel like he's a deep passing kind of offensive coordinator. He wants to set up those play actions. He wants to set up those deep balls down the field to Julio Jones, to Calvin Ridley, to Mohamed Sanu. You also help out the running game with Devontae Freeman. And even though Devontae Freeman was injured last year, I really felt like with Tevin Coleman in there, they really couldn't run the ball. And I don't think that was really Tevin Coleman's fault, more so than it was just the offensive line really took a significant drop-off from what it was in 2016 with Kyle Shanahan and with the MVP Matt Ryan. And in 2017, even when they made the playoffs and went to the divisional round. But in 2018, they just couldn't run the ball. They weren't that balanced offense, and a lot more was put on the shoulders of Matt Ryan, which just isn't going to get it done in the 2019 NFL landscape. So they get that offensive line, they help Matt Ryan protect himself, and they also help the offense run the football and stay balanced as well, which in turn helps your defense. And by helping your offense, by helping your defense with some offensive linemen, I think they also tried to help their defense here. I know it was a lot of later picks, and that's fine. Like, they picked a corner in the 5th, a corner in the 4th. They picked a D-end. I do like that they addressed some of their needs. Like, they picked 2 corners late in the draft. They picked a defensive end late in the draft, and they picked another depth running back who potentially could play for them, potentially not. But either way, these are interesting picks. I think Kaminsky is mostly a project at the defensive end position. He's actually a very rare breed, as he went from a 215-pound quarterback to a 280-pound defensive end. So he is relatively new at the position, but he has a high motor. He is a guy that could potentially add to their depth just in general. I do feel like adding Adrian Claiborne back after losing him for a season from New England was a nice move to help Vic Beasley, help Takk McKinley, but hopefully Kaminsky can come in there and help a little bit. I think Tyler Davison as well was a very underrated add along the defensive line. Of course, they still have Grady Jarrett in there, Jack Crawford in there, so they have a decent mix of talent up front. It's not as good as it once was a couple of seasons ago, but they still have a decent amount of talent. They have their pass rushers, but nobody really elite outside of Grady Jarrett. So they're just hoping that this rotation can kind of help them, and adding the depth back was a huge process to that, and Kaminsky is just one part of that. Now, in the secondary, I think the one guy that's very intriguing for the entire late portion of the draft is Kendall Sheffield, who played for Ohio State, but possibly could have went a little bit higher in this draft if he wasn't so banged up and injured coming into this draft. He had some injury issues, which I think held him from being a little bit of a higher pick. Considering he ran a 4.26, that's very rare at his pro day. He is 5'11", 193. He's kind of a prototypical corner size. He's not really big, but he's not small either. He's more of a slot corner, and that is the interesting thing to me because Robert Alford is gone, and pretty much they're trying to replace Robert Alford with Isaiah Oliver. And Isaiah Oliver was a pick last year, I believe, in the second round. So they have Desmond Trufant on one side, Isaiah Oliver on the other, both pretty tall corners, pretty athletic corners in their own right. But they have an ability here with this late round pick. With both of them, just taking flyers on Miller and Sheffield, I feel like they could possibly get a slot corner out of one of these two players and hopefully replace what Brian Poole gave them. Now, Brian Poole wasn't very good last year, but he was pretty good in terms of his first 2 seasons with the team. So if they can replace what they had in him with one of these two guys, that will be fascinating to watch. Those two guys I'm going to keep an eye on as the season develops and to see if who develops into that slot corner for Atlanta, because in the modern day NFL, that's a huge position to fill. So overall, that is pretty much what the Atlanta Falcons did in this draft. They also, in the 7th round, just a quick mention, they did, or in the 6th round, sorry, they did draft Marcus Green, who is going to be possibly their kick return, punt return guy. They also signed Kenyon Barner, who's known for that as well. But Green potentially is a dangerous 4'3", 5'8" guy as a returner, quick, pretty fast. You know, he can help in that facet of the game as a special teams player. And it's nice to see that Atlanta is also trying to address their special teams as well and the special teams kick return department. That's my overall thoughts and analysis on Atlanta's draft. If I had to give them a grade, I would overall say it's a B+ because I really, really liked what they did on their offensive line in terms of getting back to their identity of their team, what it was a couple of seasons ago. And I think this is going to be interesting because if Atlanta can get back to the playoffs, I think it's going to be a huge part and on the back of their offensive line, reestablishing what their offense can be at full capacity and full potential. Defensively, they just added some depth pieces to positions of need, which I think could work out for them, but we'll have to see. Overall, I'll give them a B+ because they address some needs. I really like the offensive line moves, and I think Atlanta is getting back to what they want to be. So that's my thoughts on the Atlanta Falcons draft for 2019. If you enjoyed, Gronk, spike the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It's Mitch at The Bottom Line View. We'll see you next video. Peace.